Hansen Yang is the most unique prospect in the 2025 NBA draft. This is Floor and Ceiling, let's break him down. It's worth asking why Hansen Yang is not widely considered a first-round pick, if not much higher than that. I'm so high on the Chinese center that he'll be in the top 10 to 15 of my next board. Yang is 7'2", with 2 years of strong production in a professional league, averaging 16 and 10 this season to go along with almost 3 blocks per game. The Qingdao big can score out of multiple spots, he can make advanced passing reads with outlier feel for his position, he's still quite young at 19, and sure, I have defensive questions, but Yang was the Chinese League's Defensive Player of the Year last season, and he's worked super hard to improve his body. Let's start with how Yang does most of his scoring, which right now comes in the post. The Chinese center is a monster on the low block who scores with 2, 3, or even 4 defenders on him. Yang is versatile here with multiple moves and counters. For instance, he likes to get middle from the block. From there, the 19-year-old can flow right across the paint if he starts on the left. Likewise, if Yang starts on the right, then he can make a sweeping move across his left. When Yang gets middle, which happens pretty often, he also likes to throw in a half spin, usually back to his left, in order to throw off his defender and finish, often using the glass. The important takeaway here for me is that the Qingdao prospect is huge, with soft touch, mitts for hands, and a real ability to shake and bake. Another thing that Yang loves to do is take one quick dribble to turn baseline off his man, and then throw down a dunk. Again, he's massive and coordinated at almost 7'2" in shoes, and the Chinese league is not very demanding from a defensive standpoint, so Yang finds it relatively easy to use his size and finish over the help. Then, as I just mentioned, he often has to deal with a bunch of attention on him. Yang is strong enough to rip through double teams, and he's zen enough to stay composed despite getting consistently swarmed. That said, and as I'll dive into, the Chinese center can still miss some passing reads when he's trying to score. And as we've been seeing, Yang can use both hands around the basket, but I think that he still needs to flesh out his left-sided and left-handed scoring. I think that the biggest question really is just how Yang's post-up heavy scoring will translate to the NBA. I have faith in the 19-year-old big as an anti-small ball measure almost, but not every team in the league is open to tossing the ball to their big in the post. In some ways, whoever drafts Yang will also test out their draft philosophy in real time, since Alpert and Shengun, who I saw a lot of Yang in, faced similar doubts pre-draft, but he was allowed to build and expand and address them in the NBA. Either way, Yang will still have to deal with different spacing and dimensions, not just with the geometry of the court, but with the size, speed, and ground coverage of NBA defenders. Yang has done very well in the CBA, but he has clear athletic limitations with his foot speed and lift that in the NBA he has to overcome. That said, Yang's on-court context at Qingdao was not ideal. When he got the ball down low, everything got incredibly static, and that is not conducive to good basketball. Yang will need to iron out his slight tunnel vision, but I think that his post-ups should largely come down to a matter of opportunity, and then, more importantly, how he adapts to making faster reads against better, more athletic defenders. Until now, I've generally really liked Yang's process in the post. When he's with his back to the basket, he can use his size to fling hook passes over defenses and accurately find his cutters. Yang reads overhelps as a passer, he shifts opponents with his eyes, he leverages his size effectively, and he makes and executes a multitude of genuinely complicated reads. The numbers definitely have to improve though, as he averaged 2.8 assists to 3.1 turnovers this season. Still, I think that Yang will always play a risky style of basketball that should lead to some extent of turnovers. It's just about how and when they come, as I'll keep diving into. Plus, his Qingdao team this season needed more scoring and less passing than last year, so this led to a lesser playmaking balance that's reflected in Yang's stats, but it's still very remarkable how he constantly created and exploited advantages in the post. Yang will be an effective pick-and-roll finisher in the NBA. His foundation is that he's huge and hugely skilled as well. When Yang rolls, he's patient and crafty. He uses step-throughs and half-spins to keep defenders guessing, all the while operating with awesome body control for a 7+ footer. Yang has huge, safe hands that he uses to secure bounce passes and overhead passes alike. Once again, check out how much attention Yang attracts on his dives to the basket, and how he still manages to execute despite all of that. It's not easy to be a 19-year-old pro dealing with 2 or 3 defenders at once during basically every game of the season. Over the next few years, I'll be checking to see whether Yang can develop some sort of push shot or floater to continue thriving in those in-between areas. Yang will operate out of the short roll very often, and I do like how he finishes at the rim. So having that alternative is important, and a lot of NBA bigs have a similar shot from the short mid-range. Right now, Yang flashes a push shot, but the Chinese center lacks consistency with it. Everything we're seeing helps unlock Yang's passing on the short roll, which might be his most visible NBA skill right now. He should be able to do what he does in China in the NBA, as long as he can adjust to the increased length, size, and speed of defenders like I mentioned. Yang is a shrewd and rapid decision maker with real craft to how he facilitates. The Chinese prospect will dish out no-look passes with precision, and he rarely gets flustered. However, the average low man in the CBA is much less impactful or athletic than in the NBA, for example. That will be a learning curve, but I think that Yang's skill set is very translatable. A lot of centers in the league are now being used to constantly run handoffs and dribble handoffs, and Yang fits this like a glove. Having this option allows whichever team drafts the current Qingdao big to surround Yang with shooters and slashers. Defenders cannot pry the ball away from the Chinese prospect's gargantuan hands, and he's intentional about setting physical screens that create actual space. In the CBA right now and going forward in the NBA, the 19-year-old should get plenty of easy assists in handoffs or indirect assists after setting screens. Yang's skill set also gives him optionality, which is super important. He can kill you from all around the floor because one tool of his unlocks the next one. Given that Yang can roll and hand off and facilitate with such ease, his team feels comfortable giving him touches above the break to orchestrate. Yang can flow into a DHO, but he's just as capable of making reads over the top, or what I like even more, finding his cutters with sharply angled bounce passes. Yang is an elite passing prospect, particularly for his position, and I just cannot understand how his tape doesn't get him a first-round look. Still, the numbers are the numbers though, and Yang turned the ball over more than he assisted. At this developmental stage, I'm not overly concerned about the volume of that since I broadly liked his reads. Still, Yang needs to be more secure with the ball. In the post, he'll get stripped when he gets crowded or simply through the virtue of having so much volume and attention down low. It'll be interesting to see how Yang will probably need to adjust to less touches with his back to the basket. Then Yang's handle is improvable as well, although we do have to keep in mind that he's 7'2". Smaller defenders can get underneath and steal the ball, so Yang needs to make sure that his handle is tight to his body. After that, some handling turnovers are avoidable and unforced. These usually come when Yang tries to do too much by putting the ball on the floor from the perimeter. The Chinese center will always turn the ball over because of how many decisions he has to take over the course of a game, but it needs to be as little as possible. What I'm most focused on going forward is whether Yang can strike more of a balance between scoring and passing. Usually, this meant in the post this season where Yang could be too single-minded in trying to put the ball in the hoop. Like I said, his context at Qingdao though was often very static. If Yang got the ball down low, most of the time his teammates just stood by and watched. However, there were still plenty of occasions where Yang could have leveraged his scoring gravity to create a better shot from the outside. Yang makes incredible reads as a passer, but he's still inconsistent about making the read to pass, if that makes sense. Looking towards the NBA, I'm wondering whether Yang can fulfill what I call the basics of being a big. That includes play finishing, screening, rim running, and rebounding. In some ways, I consider Yang's rebounding to be his swing skill. Maybe that's surprising since he's averaging a double-double, but his numbers are not as dominant when you dive into them. He's an inferior rebounder to Alperen Şengün or Domantas Sabonis, for example, and I think that the tape reflects that Yang usually gets by in the CBA by being the biggest, most skilled guy on the court. Many of his rebounds are barely contested, so he just has to get the ball and finish without requiring much technique or even motor. Most of the time, he's not really having to fight for position. It will get tougher though in the NBA, and I think we saw flashes at the Combine where Yang was okay on the glass, but did not dominate the airspace. The rim running will be interesting since it ties to the questions about Yang's athleticism as a whole. On offense, it will be about his stamina and capacity to run up and down the court time and time again in the NBA. Yang has worked really hard on his body to get in impressive shape, but this remains a question. Overall though, I do think that he's a better athlete than he's given credit for, and he can even do things like this. Yang just has interesting, fun, funky flashes from all over his game. One of the questions to ask maybe is whether he can make threes. In that regard, he does have soft touch and he started taking more shots from downtown. But a three-pointer is still pretty theoretical, and instead I want to see Yang make his free throws at a higher clip. He converted about 68% this season, and I have his career average tracked at around 66%. Then, Yang has also taken a few turnarounds out of the post this season. These don't really go in, but it's interesting to think about the possibility since he's 7'2". This is what makes Yang's overall package so unique, since he does some ridiculous things, including when he puts the ball on the floor. We don't really see this much outside of the post or the roll, but Yang can attack from the perimeter or even after a defensive rebound. Like everything else, he has really intriguing body control, and at times, Yang has even flashed a final slow step and the capacity to decelerate. Hansen Yang is a truly risky defensive prospect. On one hand, the Chinese big is almost always going to have certain athletic limitations. Yang's foot speed is slow and his lift off the floor is below average. The 19-year-old plays with a high center of gravity and he has inflexible, rigid hips. Yang really struggles in the pick and roll right now, even at the CBA level. In the NBA, he could honestly get cooked on most trips down the floor early on in his career. When Yang has to guard a screen even somewhat close to the level, his hips turn like a cruise ship. Yang is pretty stiff with a first step back that is difficult to be effective with. He gave up bucket after bucket in the pick and roll this year, and he also found it very difficult when playing with a version of the Chinese national team at last year's Summer League and in previous contexts. I'm more focused on Yang's CBA tape though, which shows me that he might be a pick and roll target for NBA teams throughout his entire career. It will be on the Qingdao big to prove that he can survive in ball screens. Getting lower and in a stance more often would help, which maybe can come with less demands on offense. What worries me the most though is Yang's second jump, or really his lack thereof. If you watch the Chinese big's defensive possessions, he really only has the capacity to make 2 moves. Yang can open up his hips once, and he can leave his feet once. If he has to do either of those again, then he's in trouble, and that's not a good recipe for pick and roll success, particularly when you're a center who's going to be involved in all sorts of actions. Yang can be immensely valuable on offense, but down the other end, he needs to stay on the floor defensively. Otherwise, his playoff usage might be very limited, and even his regular season outcome could be affected. That might sound shocking, given that Yang averaged nearly 3 blocks per game this year, and he was the CBA's Defensive Player of the Season last season. So let's get into what Yang can do well on defense, and more importantly, how his NBA future might be approached. In the short term, I think that Yang's defensive outcome in the NBA is predicated on whether he can be insulated in drop coverage. You don't want Yang to cover a lot of space or have to change directions too often, so drop really simplifies his responsibilities and narrows down his radius. I consider Yang to be a similar prospect to Derek Queen, so I'll actually point to the Maryland freshman here. Yang shares how Queen can offset his athletic limitations through his quick hands to get steals and blocks. With the former, Yang has active mittens and just overall good feel for the game, so he can employ both of those things. Then, to get rejections, Yang mostly depends on his timing and hand placement rather than pop. Again, he's not twitchy or explosive, so his margin for error is very slim. Yang can make plays, and he started moving his feet much better, but the athletic thresholds, so to speak, in the NBA are way more demanding. That's why you may be wondering how Yang does when he's switched out in space. The results actually haven't been that bad in my opinion. The Chinese center is definitely slow, but he's huge, so a single step takes up a lot of space. Instead, I'm much more concerned about the pick and roll. There, Yang lacks versatility and recovery tools. Despite the improvement to his body over the last year or so, Yang struggles to decelerate and change speeds. Plus, if he leaves his feet, be that for a closeout or a block, he definitely cannot get back into the play, and I think that Yang can still do better at being less jumpy. I'm hoping that NBA talent, coaching, and athleticism can help conceal the Chinese prospect's limitations, but Yang has many questions of his own to answer that can make or break his long-term role in the league. In a best-case scenario, Yang can dribble, pass, and score, and he'll be a starting center for an NBA team. His lowest end outcome is being out of the league and back in China in the CBA. And finally, a median outcome sees Yang as a spark plug second unit big with limited versatility and use.